Hello everybody. This year I appear to have been working my way through Maserati's back catalogue. I began with a pair of 3200s and followed that up with a fairly rare manual 4200, otherwise known as the Coupe. Now, in that video I said that I'd love to have a go of the car which followed, the Granturismo. And I've got to say a really big thank you to all the Maserati owners out there because a lot of people got in touch and offered me their cars. Well, the first one I'm driving is this, Andy's 2010 Granturismo S, because I thought it'd be a pretty good place to start. A few people offered me their Granturismo Sport, which is a later car, but I thought I'd want to try and drive an early one and then see how the model progressed. Now, the Granturismo was a direct replacement for the 4200 or Coupe. In fact, it's probably a direct replacement really for the Gran Sport, which was the run-out version of that car. Famously, this was developed in a very, very short time period because Ferrari allegedly stole the plans Maserati had for their new car and turned it into the California. Those sneaky devils. I'm not entirely sure how true that is, but one thing is certain. The Granturismo is a great looking car. Now, for something that was developed in such a short space of time, it was in production for an awfully long one. This was on sale for about 12 years, from 2007 up until last year. Now, it changed a little bit over that time, but in comparison to most other manufacturers, really they were facelifts and tweaks. You had a couple of more hardcore variants, like the MC Stradale, and I'd love to eventually drive one of those. I've often looked at buying one of these cars, but a few things have put me off. Firstly, you've got a choice of two gearboxes depending on exactly which model you go for. You can have either a regular traditional 6-speed torque converter automatic, or you can have the MC shift, like this car has. Now, that is their name for essentially the same system that Ferrari called F1. It's a single clutch automated box. It also had very different gearing to that in the torque converter auto. Maserati called it sprint gearing, making this a little bit quicker too. Of course, with the passage of time, we've come to look a little bit less favourably on these systems. However, even at modest speeds, I can tell you that this is actually not as bad a box as you may think. Now, like all single clutch automated manuals, the one thing I tell you is don't let it change its own gears because it's not really very good at it. If you want to flap the paddles yourself, it's actually pretty decent. Bearing in mind I've just spent a few weeks in a Ferrari 430, which has a very similar system in it, and I'd say actually the Maserati is the better gearbox, certainly for ordinary driving duties. The largest criticism of this car was always the fact that it was very heavy and not especially fast. Now, 440 horsepower was a reasonable amount when this car debuted 10 years ago. Unfortunately, the curb weight of around 1.9 tons was also quite a bit. This is a lot heavier than even an Aston Martin DB9, but making up for that is the fact that it's actually quite a bit roomier than a DB9 too. You've got a lot of headroom in the back. I know it doesn't necessarily look it, but this is a genuine four-seater. This is not really a 2+2. Now, you're thrown because the side profile makes it look like it's a nice, sleek coupe, and indeed it is. It's just very big. This thing's nearly 5 meters long, and in fact it's a whole foot longer than the old 4200. That being said, I think actually it is a better looker. There are far fewer awkward angles, particularly on the S onwards, which gained a little flick at the back, making it look that much more aggressive. Now, early cars had a 4.2-litre V8, the precise same unit really that you saw in the older Coupe. But the S onwards got a 4.7-litre version of this engine, which saw service all the way through the rest of the car's life. At the end, it was making around 460 horsepower, so not really a great deal more than it is here. As you would hope from an old-school Italian naturally aspirated V8, it sounds fantastic. Real surprise of this car is quite how firm it is. The ride really is pretty harsh. Now, it's not crashy, but it's really pretty close. I mean, I'm talking sort of 718 GT4 levels here. This is not a comfortable plush ride at all. My friend's Aston Martin Vantage N430 I criticised for being perhaps a little bit too firm, and I'd say this is firmer still. The seats also feel fairly hard too. They've got plenty of adjustment in them though, and they're not actually that uncomfortable. I do tend to find firmer seats actually better for longer journeys. The interior is really rather nice. Okay, sure, some of the infotainment's now looking its age, and indeed it was never really that up to date. It's only in the last couple of years Maserati put anything reasonably contemporary in these cars. However, the amount of leather in here is quite pleasing. The only difference really between this and the older cars is that those often had leather on the roof as well, but this has this nice sort of dark fabric, which is absolutely fine. Everywhere you look though, it does feel pretty special. There's some fun little details too, like the pedals, which are proper metal. And you also have the world's smallest ashtray. Nowadays you can pick up one of these, if you're careful, for just over £20,000, and that does include a Granturismo S as well, not just the early 4.2s. And that means there's something of a tempting car if you're looking at, say, perhaps a weekend exotic that's just a little bit different. They made in total less than 30,000 of these if you discount the cabriolet version, which was somewhat rarer. The speed of this car, of course, is always going to be dictated by what you are used to, and I think really this is still a pretty brisk car. However, in the previous Maseratis, it was never their outright pace that I found problem with, more the way that they went round a corner. I'm very happy to say that in this car, Maserati finally appear to have fixed the wayward handling that all the previous ones I've driven had. They still have their adaptive skyhook suspension, which you can run in a couple of different modes, but it actually works here. Steering feel is pretty good. It is, of course, hydraulic. And the car's weight distribution is not too bad, thanks to that engine being pushed as far back in the front as you can possibly get it. There is decent, usable, clean power, all the way from about 3,000 to 7.5, where the car will hit its red line. And at every point during that rev range, it sounds absolutely glorious. Perhaps the best thing about that sprint gearing is the fact you get the chance to do that so many more times. Even in third at full chat, you're not really going that quick. But it's fine. I don't think anybody's ever bought one of these to be the fastest thing on the roads. But if you want to be the best looking and best sounding, it's a pretty good way to do it. There are some downsides. I've spoke to a few different owners of these cars, and they've come back with wildly varying reports as to how reliable the cars actually are. I spoke to a couple of specialists, and they seem to think that they're just as problematic as the old Maseratis were. However, that does come with the caveat that whenever they see these cars, that's usually because they're broken. With a lot of them having been cheap for quite a while, you are going to want to make sure you get a specialist inspection or something sensible like that, just to make sure you're not buying into any potential money pit. With both the 32 and 4200s, the steering just had this weird delay in it. You'd turn and the car would then indeed turn, but about half a second after it should have done, but then turned so viciously it all just was a little bit wrong. In this car, they finally managed to get rid of that disconnect, and the whole system actually works. Now, apparently, in the old Grand Sport, they'd sorted things as well, but I've yet to have the pleasure of one of those. Visibility is not too bad. This A-pillar is pretty chunky, so you do need to watch out for that. Although you can actually see a little bit of the bonnet. You can just see the edges, which is a really nice touch. Like all automated manuals, if you want a smooth upshift, just lift your foot ever so slightly when you're working through the gears, and then it will be pretty decent. Now, if you engage sport mode, you will sharpen up the transmission. So, as we're testing this car, we probably should test that. Downshifts, really, I had no problem with anyway, but let's just see how it changes things. So yeah, I've just left my foot in for that one. You can certainly feel it's changing somewhat quicker, but that was a half throttle, half RPM shift. So I'm going to get to the national speed limit and see what she's like when you're then at full bore with the MC shift mode engaged. good shift actually when you're at full tilt. It's still a bit of a, there's still a little bit of a jerk to it, but actually not too bad. I feel miles more confident pushing this car than I have any of the previous Mazdas that I've driven. Brakes are actually pretty decent too. This is a lovely thing. Rear end will snatch on you a little bit if you're in a tricky condition and you shift up, but not really very disconcerting at all. Granturismo. This is not what I expected whatsoever. As an actual tourer, I think it's somewhat limited in its ability thanks to the firm ride and the still fairly restricted boot space. But as a sports car with 4 seats, this thing's pretty good. A lot of other Maserati cars I've made comparisons with Ferrari because that's what everybody does. But really, genuinely, this is the only one where I can actually say, yeah, this feels like a decent, viable Ferrari alternative without having to put some massive caveat on it. Granturismo is not perfect, but it looks good, sounds great, and it's a lot of fun. It is a proper Italian car, and although it might cost you a fair bit to run, to buy one, there's something of a bargain. Anyway, that's all from me on this one. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye bye.